What jobs can damage your mental health the most? I think the most mentally damaging part of my job as a paramedic is developing a kind of apathy toward life. I care about myself and other people, but seeing skilled nursing facilities full of people with zero quality of life, hundreds of homeless patients way beyond the point of no return, and poor families sitting on the floor eating fast food for dinner has shifted my view on the purpose of living. I believe there are people who are perpetually in survival mode and seem to have little to no joy in life, let alone agency. If there's any pragmatic thought to come from this, it's that termination access should be easy. Well, alright, resilience training should be a middle school class subject and would defeat the aspect of our society that prioritizes greed. Story 2. I'm a social worker who works specifically with foster kids and caseworkers. There are amazing, highly empathetic caseworkers, and they usually stay that way for 1 to 3 years before transitioning to one of two paths: burnout and quitting, or establishing rigid boundaries and coming across as a bit cold. The latter are still highly competent and caring, they just don't put themselves out as much for their work. For example, they strictly won't answer the phone after 5 p.m. Another more common subset of caseworkers is apathetic toward human suffering. They stay in the position because there's high turnover and they can get away with doing the bare minimum because there's no one else desperate to do the job for such little pay. In my experience, the second type is usually the one who gets promoted to supervisor. I get a lot of secondhand trauma in my position: placement stabilization for foster homes. I do counseling, mentoring, and parent coaching. But there's not as much turnover at our agency. We get a lot of support, plenty of paid time off, and we only have to work with the kids and foster families, so we usually see a lot more engagement. Caseworkers have to deal directly with cruel biological families and are left holding the bag at the end when something goes wrong. If a kid has to be emergency moved and there's no placement available, it's the caseworker sleeping in the car with them that night, not me. Story 3. Retail, 100%. The older generations can be very entitled, and it can be difficult to deal with them no matter how hard you try. Not all of them, of course. Some are very nice, but there is a fair number who are awful to deal with. Like just today, I had an older gentleman come in for help with his email on his phone. As you read this, keep in mind we provide this assistance for free as a courtesy. He couldn't understand what two-step verification was or why the code was being sent to his wife's phone. I politely tried to explain the situation, that this must be the way he set it up a long time ago. But if he simply called or texted his wife for the code, we could solve the problem for him. I even offered to help him update his two-step verification with his number instead of his wife's, but we still needed the code from his wife to do that. He still didn't understand what was happening, so he ended up screaming at me. "You don't know what you're doing and you shouldn't work here," he says. Being yelled at like that in front of your coworkers and customers can easily ruin your mental state for a while. Story 4. Any job with a toxic enough environment can be difficult. This has been a hard year for me. A drunk driver crashed into my house, my dad has been in and out of hospitals, and my sister passed away in May. My boss, quote-unquote, caught me taking a nap during my break in the break room on a reclining chair that is specifically there for employees to take naps. She pulled me into a meeting, which was just 20 minutes of her yelling at me and telling me I'm lazy and depressing. She literally said, "I don't care if someone crashed into your house or your dad is sick or that your sister's gone. I can't have this kind of depressing behavior dragging down everyone's morale. Should I cut your hours, or maybe I should replace you with someone who is happy and energetic?" Yeah, cool. I had a panic attack for the first time in ages after that. Story 5. I work in emergency dispatch. You don't always get closure. When a call ends, you have no idea who they are or if they were saved. Sometimes you hear terrible things and you're completely powerless. All you can do is listen. People panic and don't think straight when they call 911, and it's stressful trying to get their location and coordinate with EMS or the police. Sometimes you just can't understand what they're saying because of poor call quality, or they're yelling, or for any other reason. As much as you want to help, there's only so much you can do from a desk. Nobody knows you, so nobody can thank you for saving their life. There's not a lot of satisfaction in the job because you don't always know what happens after you hang up. Story 6. I'm a first responder. Long story short, I ended up ODS, off-duty sick, for what was diagnosed as PTSD just as the pandemic started. I began woodworking as an outlet and started making custom cribbage boards. Somehow, someone contacted my wife through social media. As a cop, I hate anything related to social media, asking me to make a cribbage board. His son was a paramedic whose partner had ended it all after years on the job. During their off time, they would pass the time by playing cribbage, and he asked if I could make a board for the station. It was a powerful experience to help others deal with PTSD while I was dealing with the same thing. I'd share a picture, but I'm completely socially illiterate and can't seem to figure it out. Essentially, it was a circular maple board with the paramedic's emblem and the medic's call sign engraved in blue epoxy. As messed up as I am after almost 20 years of being a first responder, it is absolutely worth it. My small contribution is well worth the bi-weekly appointments with my psychologist and psychiatrist and the 12 daily prescriptions I take. Story 7. Sales, especially telesales, can be tough. You have to make cold calls all day, every day to people who 99.9% of the time don't answer the phone. On the off chance they do pick up, they have never heard of your company and they say they're not interested before you can even explain the reason for your call. You have to leave the same voicemail message over and over again, or you get hung up on or screamed out. It's a constant, nonstop cycle of rejection day in and day out, and it's only for people with the thickest of skins. The boring, repetitive nature of the job is also pretty soul-crushing. Your quota is almost always unattainable, and if you do achieve it, your boss will increase it the next day. It made me want to stick forks in my eyes. I hope I am never forced to do it again. Story 8. Public-facing service jobs have extremely high burnout rates and contribute significantly to anxiety and prejudice. First responders have to deal with a lot of the trauma from witnessing terrible incidents. Depending on your specific role, you have to also handle a great deal of public-facing service work. Medical and veterinary work also has a high burnout rate and involves dealing with the worst of humanity. Rescue work, whether for women, children, animals, etc., is also very difficult. In some countries, you are actively at risk of meeting the same or worse fate as those you are helping. Working with the homeless or in women's shelters also leads to quick burnout and means seeing the worst of humanity because of how people are treated or how they may treat each other. Basically, the answer is working with people, specifically people in crisis or working with crises and other living things that were caused by people. Story 9. Correction officers. I never was one, but I knew a few people who were. Their mindsets were forever changed by the people put behind bars. They couldn't lower the guard around anyone given the kinds of people they had to guard. I once worked as a barista and chatted with a retired officer. He told me how vindictive inmates could be and how they become so used to being behind bars that they've settled into their rough identities. Another person I knew went from working a different job to working in corrections for 2 years before quitting and going back to his old job. He said that it messed him up psychologically to have to be alert all the time. I don't know much about the job aside from what I've heard, but these were two different people, generations apart, who had the same serious look when explaining and looking back on it. That kind of scared me enough not to ask any more questions or else they might get frustrated with me. Story 10. Social worker specializing in child placement or care. A friend of mine had this job and she had to quit after 3 years and no one can blame her for that. She helped minors and handled many cases of neglect within families. One time in her office, she had to speak politely with a parent who had been convicted. She felt disgusted but had to remain professional. This job took a huge toll on her mental health. She was not the same person afterward. So thank you to all the folks who keep going into these difficult but essential jobs. Those people have nerves of steel. Story 11. I've worked in sales for years and I don't believe I've ever lied or been shady. It's possible to do well yourself that way and it gets you a solid reputation that works in your favor. So it's not the job itself that's the problem, assuming you're not a sleazeball. The part that damages your mental health is the sales meetings and training sessions. Management preaches that they don't want you to be shady, but then they praise the shadiest coworker you've ever met, gushing about how he's, quote, following the system. Everyone but management knows this is a terrible approach. This guy is out there lying and making promises he can't keep, doing all the things that make people hate salespeople, and that's the standard everyone else is held to. I'm 99% sure management knows and secretly wants everyone to be that way, but can't come out and say it. Then again, there's a good chance managers are just idiots who have no clue. It's maddening. Story 12. I'm a refrigeration and AC journeyman with an on-call schedule. The constant scheduling has strained my personal relationships because I never know when I'll be home or for how long. Other people don't get it when I don't have the energy to be social after working 10 to 18-hour days, so I usually just keep going solo. The isolation is starting to ruin my physical health just as much as my mental health now. I'm waiting to find a position with no on-call requirement, and I may be willing to take a small pay cut. Well, I guess at least the fridge at home is always working perfectly. Story 13. It's been a long time, and I'm in a much healthier and better place now. I was in the military and did 2 tours in Iraq. I didn't do anything there that I regret or that anyone would classify as a moral injury, other than participating in the war in general because it was a BS war. I managed to do some good for civilians and refugees in my limited capacity. However, I still saw, heard, smelled, and touched messed up crap. It sticks with you. Also, I don't want sympathy. We've all seen that meme that says America will send its military to a country, terminate a bunch of civilians, and then make movies about how sad veterans are. I want people to vote and to vote for people who put diplomacy, democracy, and social well-being ahead of military action. We should take care of vets regardless of the level of BS inherent to the war, but the goal should be to make fewer messed up veterans. Story 14. My last year at a summer camp wasn't, that bad. And this year, it's not even the children that are the problem, it's the parents. Some of them come in the morning, drop off their kids, and then go across the street to get intoxicated. The number of people who think they can just walk in the building and find their kids is mind boggling. I constantly hear children screaming all day, and on some days, I come home with ringing in my ears. Yesterday, I had to file a report about a child. I had to talk to a social worker for an hour and didn't get my break. On the cool side, I actually like seeing the kids have a good time. It is cultivating an intensely kind, loving side of me that I hope to have when I raise my own children. But seriously, summer camp is insanity. Story 15. Beyond the obvious coroner, medical examiner, first responder, child therapist, and DCFS types of jobs where you see gore or are constantly surrounded by the worst examples of human beings, I'd say any job that you truly hate doing is damaging. Many years ago, I took a quote unquote safe job. I hated the work and the politics, but at the time, it paid well and had amazing benefits. Within my first week, my boss pulled me aside and said, "You really need to find a different line of work. You're a great worker, but I can tell this isn't something you want to do. I promise you, within 5 years, you're going to burn yourself out." No joke, on my 5th anniversary, as they handed me a gold leaf certificate, I had this, what the heck am I doing with my life kind of moment. And I just brushed it off because it was a quote unquote safe job. What about the benefits? For the next 2 years, I became more and more depressed and started hating myself. I had already been suffering from poor mental health, as people often do in their 20s, but this was over the top. I started dreading the mornings, wishing each day I would just pass away in my sleep. As the 7th year rolled around, I quit. Quitting that job was one of the best things outside of therapy I had ever done for my mental health and was definitely one of the best decisions I ever made. I found out rather quickly that there are other jobs out there and didn't have any trouble finding work worth doing. If you find yourself truly hating your profession, start building your exit strategy right now. Your future self will appreciate it beyond measure. Story 16. I know some ex-military guys. One was into recoveries and all that sort of jazz. He's seen a ton of bad stuff, but his mood thankfully doesn't show it. Another spent most of his life in the Israeli military. Watching that close quarters combat from today makes me truly amazed by how they cope. Both got out relatively well, but they've lost most of their capacity to value the life of others. They would take yours if they needed to and wouldn't even care. Terminating people for a living truly just makes humans human. Story 17. I work in mental health crisis response, often with teenagers, and frequently with cases involving schizophrenia and substance use. The afflictions people suffer from are often invisible, and you struggle to make sense of them. You have a person in front of you who appears fine but is clearly suffering, or they're further along in their struggle and you're in disbelief at how they've survived for so long. Kids will often tell you what you want to hear, that everything is fabulous and their parents are overreacting. You leave, and by the time you get back into the office, they've escalated and made another serious attempt. All you can do is listen and talk, and you feel helpless to assist or make much of a difference besides coaxing some sort of short-term safety plan out of them, a promise that they won't end it all for today, at least. Story 18. I have a friend who is a high school teacher and is told to screw off by students every single day. She's trying to teach and meet the endless requirements for the department, but the kids are out of control. Whenever she asks for help, management twists it around so that she is the problem, not the students' behavior. For example, she'll report, "Johnny told me to screw off and threw his chair across the room, hitting another student." The management response is, "It sounds like your lesson wasn't engaging enough. You need to make your lessons more interesting." She is seriously on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and her mental health has utterly disintegrated since she got this job. She could solve the problem by teaching her students how to properly aim for their chairs for, maximum engagement. Story 19. Call center jobs can be incredibly tough. You'd be amazed at how comfortable people are being nasty to another human being over the phone. More often than not, they are already agitated when they call you. You deal with one angry customer, and you'll have to deal with the next one right after you end the previous call. That, plus your manager and metrics, dictates that you finish each call within a short time frame, for example, 5 minutes, or get written up. It's a soul-crushing job, and to this day, it still affects how I treat phone calls. I don't like having long conversations on the phone. I just need to know what it is, when it is, and what I can do. Story 20. I've had the following jobs: U.S. Army, enlisted, GameStop warehouse, promoted twice in 6 months, barista, server, sales, promoted to assistant manager in 6 months, cocktail waitress, food service, shift lead, bakery, substitute teacher, secondary English teacher, editor, author, office assistant. The hardest job physically was being enlisted in the Army, obviously. The hardest job mentally and emotionally is being a teacher in challenging school. If you're in a good school with chill administrators, involved but not rude parents, and respectful students, it's pretty easy after the first year or two. It might even be a bit boring and is definitely underpaid, but it kind of balances out with the time off if you do it right. But if any one of those elements is bad, it's really bad. Why? Sure, retail or food service sucks when customers are schmucks, but how many of you got into retail because you care? Very few, if any. It's just a job. I know because I've been there. I left without feeling stressed or caring about the stuff that went down. But as a teacher, I care. I show up every day to make a difference, inspire kids, help them, and sometimes even save them. So when those kids are defiant, disrespectful, or lately just completely disengaged, it hurts. It hurts more when half the kids either don't show up, sit on their phones, don't participate at all, or don't do any work. This is a new trend since lockdown. No matter what techniques we use, we can't reach most of them. Some places are better than others, but the trend is depressing. Add in administration issues like favoritism, hypocrisy, discrimination, and ever increasing expectations for teachers, but not for everyone else. Then there are parents who blame us for everything, take no accountability, and give their teenagers zero responsibility. Then there's the fact that in a lot of places, we don't even make a living wage. I'm a single mother with no support from family or the father. My dad was a teacher and he raised 5 kids on a single income, but I'm struggling to raise one. There were days in the past 3 years of paying for daycare that I had to choose between food for the week or gas. I had to call into work because I obviously picked food. Then my pay got docked because I had to use up all of my 10 PTO sick days when my daughter got sick. Oh, and let's not forget the active training we have to do thanks to the constant threat of doom looming over our schools. I just love explaining to my students how I'd respond in that situation. Fun time, super cool. Obviously, my personal circumstances add more stress, which affects mental health. And I will add that if you're a soldier and you deploy, that is obviously way worse for your mental health. But out of all the jobs I've worked, none have demoralized me and caused me as much anxiety and depression as teaching in America. I finally have a part-time job in an office, but it's not enough on its own. Hopefully the experience will add up and give me a way out of teaching the next year, but this year I'm going back in. I'm hoping for a better position this year and I'm moving in with my partner, which will help the cost of living and childcare if my kid gets sick. I'll still be the primary parent, and if she gets very ill, he won't be able to help, but for those annoying 1 to 2 day mild fevers, he can help, which will be amazing. Story 21. Freaking any of them. It all depends on how a person handles stress, how they define it, and how it affects them. It also depends on how mentally healthy or resilient they already are, how they spend their downtime or recovering. For example, when it comes to generic heavy labor or grunt work, I'll go all day in the elements working as hard as 3 guys while they sit around on their 50th smoke break. I'll probably be in a better mood than when I started, but make me do that for 70 hours a week so that I have zero time for my family, my own interest, and my hobbies. And I guarantee it from numerous first-hand experiences, I will end up breaking down and just weeping like a freaking psycho, even in front of everyone. I'll still do the job and I'll do it well, but I'll just uncontrollably weep. The same thing happens if I have a particularly humbling week where something I'm normally good at just doesn't go my way and I fail at everything. I don't ever really need a physical break or a break from a challenge in general. I do need a mental break. The important thing to remember, though, is that what stresses someone else to that point might be my idea of therapy. If taken in good faith, when someone says they are stressed, taxed, or overburdened, it should just be plainly viewed as stress, not what is causing it. I probably just wrote a book on how to explain things poorly, but that's my take on things. And if you're enjoying the video, don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 22. No, the call center is proven to be mentally damaging. I worked for a major corporation in sales for a while. One day, I had a meeting with some fellow top employees, and none of us knew why we were there. The VP came in and said, "You guys are in here because you have been here for at least 3 years, and we want to thank you. We did some studies, and it's proven that after 3 years, this job affects your mental health. So you guys can have a 4-day work week if you work 8-hour shifts." Notice that the normal shift is 6 hours? That's because you literally see people throwing things, having nervous breakdowns, and fighting. It's wild. I quit shortly after that. Story 23. The mental toll of being a scientist is higher than most people think. Science is an extremely exploitative field. Scientists are chronically underpaid and work extremely long hours. I've had months of 84-hour work weeks just to meet a deadline with no weekends. Besides that, it's an extremely competitive field. You're forced to fight for grants with a 1% success rate. Imposter syndrome, as well as anxiety and depression, is rampant among PhD students. A study once found that 50% of PhD students in Amsterdam were clinically depressed. Meanwhile, you're forced to write paper after paper. You have to pay to get those papers published in the highest possible journals, but once you're published, you get no compensation for people reading your work. All the while, your toxic supervisor bullies and scolds you for not doing something the way they want. You're just supposed to take it because they literally hold your future as a scientist in their hands. Also, let's not even get started on the mentally adverse effects of having to work with vertebrates. Do you think you'll just disassociate after terminating your 1000th mouse? Some people claim they do, but many others cannot stand it no matter how often they do it. Story 24. As an autistic person, I'd say that my kitchen, bartending, and brewery work was really tough physically. I absolutely loved it and could work 80-hour weeks for months without even noticing. However, I once worked in a clean room making semiconductors. The outfit, those with rooms with no music or anything, just staring at the tools, seriously sent me into a sensory nightmare overload. Now, even if I watch someone put on or wear a clean suit, I get serious anxiety and would probably physically remove myself as far as I can. Story 25. The job of a UPS driver is incredibly demanding. Drivers work 10, 14 hours a day. The heat in most areas is brutal in the summer, and the trucks don't have air conditioning. You're constantly battling bad drivers, dogs, and crazy customers who blame you for not having a package on your truck. November and December are a haze where you're only home for long enough to eat and shower before waking up to do it all over again. You're so exhausted on the weekends that it's hard to move. But the most brutal part is that management is constantly trying to fire you for insignificant write-ups. They are rarely successful, but every day being a battle gets old. It's no surprise they have one of the highest divorce rates of any company. Story 26. The call center is a mentally taxing place to work. There was an extremely high turnover rate, even more so with the luxury brands. I can't share some of the thoughts I've had, but suffice to say, the job combined with my past trauma to the point that I needed years of therapy and quit the second a new job became available. You can only handle so much yelling and so many threats over the phone before it starts to get to you. Half of the yelling comes from your managers who are more concerned about service levels than your well-being. I once had to sit on the line for 4 hours getting yelled at by a lawyer because someone had misspelled his mistress's email address. Then there are calls that are just gut punches. I had to maintain composure as a woman explained that her car had been robbed after her husband had been terminated in their own living room. I then had to tell her with as much self-control as I could muster that there was nothing we could do to help. I could hear the police walking around on broken glass in the background. Quality control and management were listening in on the call. I broke down after they confirmed there was nothing at all that we could have done. Despite the fact that I needed to decompress, I had to soldier on and take more calls. They even sent someone into the bathroom to get me and tell me I had to take more calls. Story 27. I hate to say it, but most jobs end up being the soul-sucking bane of your existence. Even if you like a job, you'll likely get caught up in logistical BS and eventually want to change. My experience comes from working at a grocery store. I've worked multiple times stocking shelves, cleaning, and in the produce department. I did 2 years of night shifts stocking shelves from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The nights weren't bad and the crew was great, but the daytime atmosphere and the high school style hierarchy were terrible. The people who had been there for a long time were miserable and you could see it. You're not valued as a person, you're valued as a body that can move products, and that's all. Later in life, I got into healthcare. I love it. I love helping people and promoting positivity and good health. I love it, but working a job for any large company will suck everything out of you, pay you as little as they can, and then act like they are the victim when they fire you. Story 28. Being a manager is hard. It can be lonely, especially if you manage a support department that assists others. Who do you commiserate with? Your employees are probably fine, but they'll misconstrue your words to gain imaginary points. Your peers will steal your ideas, and your boss looks at you like you know all the answers. Middle management is tough. I see posts from line-level employees complaining about managers, and I usually get a chuckle because many times the hate is warranted. However, there's always a bigger fish, and they're the ones directing things from behind. The politics, practices, and all that other crap are just a pain, but hey, you get a bonus, so that's cool. Story 29. I think paramedics probably have it much worse, but I think veterinary medicine is brutal at times. Some clients are great and the animals are amazing, but the suffering is immense. The amount of neglect from people who supposedly love their animals astounds me. Animals come in septic because the client tried to treat serious wounds without professional help. We see massive weight loss and illness associated with untreated diabetes, as well as secondary skin infections because the animals are allergic to fleas. So many animals are so far gone when some things could have been treated early and resolved at, or at least managed. That's all on top of the low pay and some of the ridiculously disrespectful clientele who think they know more than the vet because of Google. Story 30. I was a mental health counselor in a residential facility. Don't get me wrong, I truly love my job. I specialized in working with medication-resistant individuals who were coming to us from psychiatric hospitals, and my goal was to help them reintegrate into the community. So many people I truly cared about were lost to coding after they left our programs. Many lost access to care due to a lack of funding or housing. I honestly just lost trust in my own system when one man ended it all and he should have been under better care. I now work in cancer care. It's less damaging because we have incredible funding and my doctors have amazing resources. I had a patient today who was struggling, and within 3 hours, we ensured everything she needed was covered. I was also able to get her scheduled for her appointments. Story 31. I know this isn't and shouldn't be at the top of the list, but it's definitely up there. I worked at a call center for an insurance company, and my role was to handle emergency medical assistance claims. It was an almost daily occurrence that would get into an argument with my bosses over very minor things that would wipe out a client's coverage. I decided to quit when one of them told me, "It's best not to think about them as people, you can't help them." I ended up in a bit of a spat with my wife after that call because of what I said back to my boss. It was during lockdown and was working from home, but she didn't hear the other side of the conversation. And all she heard was me saying, "Pardon my language, but that is absolutely fed. I do not agree with you, and I think what you just have said is absolute BS." My wife had never heard me speak that way to anyone before, let alone to my superior at work. I don't want to tell her what made me say that because she's very sensitive to matters of justice, and we had already agreed that I wouldn't talk with her about work since a lot of what I had to deal with was soul crushing. She was giving me a hard time about it for days, and I finally told her. She replied, "You cannot work there anymore. Don't even wait to find something else. We can manage." Story 32. As someone who talks to and helps a lot of people relax, I'd bet on mental health professionals. They have to sit and listen to everyone's problems all day long for their entire career. I can only imagine some of the messy interpersonal struggles they have to unravel and the horror and dread they must feel while putting a smile on their face. Logic is great because it makes sense, but human emotions are messy and complicated. They don't have to make sense, and that can be frustrating. Story 33. About 7 years ago, I worked as a help desk supervisor for the largest ISP in the USA. My job was to take escalation calls from the absolute worst customers you've ever had in your life. I've been called everything under the sun and have been yelled at and screamed at more than in any other role in the call center. I started having daily panic attacks and horrific anxiety while doing that job. Thankfully, I was able to move to another department in the call center at the time. But talk about awful. As a supervisor, I had to uphold the ISP's ridiculous protocols, which I didn't agree with, and not bend to customers who wanted everything done yesterday. It was unbelievably stressful, and I wouldn't recommend that job to my worst enemy. Story 34. I'm a firefighter. I can confirm that I've seen some terrible things. I was a firefighter for only 9 years in a smaller town, but we covered multiple townships with tons of small, twisty black roads. We were always quietly offered mental health services if we needed them, but no one that I knew ever took advantage of it because you were seen as a coward if you did. You would have likely been made fun of, at least by the older guys who thought that way. I personally always used really dark humor to get through some things with my other fire buddies. I don't have nightmares or any mental health issues from it, but it still freaks me out when I sit here and actively think about that stuff. I keep that crap locked away in my brain and never think about it except for posts like this. Story 35. I transcribe police interviews, suspects, witnesses, and subjects of interest. For one of the Kitty Fiddler's interviews, I had to bring my trash can next to my desk because of how descriptive he was being. It made me ill. I transcribed one man denying that he terminated his girlfriend while his hands were swollen like balloons. I have had to transcribe, word for word, the reaction of a woman finding out her boyfriend was terminated and another woman finding out her best friend was terminated too. There's no feeling quite like transcribing notifications and knowing it's about to happen on the video. At the beginning of the video, her life is still her life as she knows it, and I know that in 3 minutes I'm going to watch her life change forever. The anticipation of that is impossible to describe. All of that has completely changed me as a person, and I don't sleep very much. Story 36. I think that nearly anyone doing the actual work in any industry, that is to say everyone but the C-suite executives, has it tough. Humans aren't really designed to do work and labor the way we do it in Western society. Work means taking something you got special training in because it was opportune or you found a knack for it or maybe had an interest in it, and then maximizing your marketability for that thing. We are built on burning ourselves out for at least 40 hours a week and ensuring that societal responsibilities don't rotate within our communities. Speaking personally, I've worked in a lot of capacities and gotten good enough that advancement within the same wheelhouse wasn't possible. I started in tech assembly and design. I then weirdly went into the background check aspect of HR. After that, I went into logistics for massive protein description and then recruitment. Now I work in medical research. Burnout is always something around the corner. I talk to the heartbroken, the lost, the hurt, the depressed, and desperate and evil all day, every Monday through Friday. I recall many of my patients daily. I love to work, and some days are especially hard, so I get burnt out. Both are true. Story 37. I actually got torn up, working as a sales rep and then manager in craft beer for 7 years. I kept going because the money was good and I'm naturally good at it, but dang, it messed me up more than I expected. I was spending all my emotional bandwidth on people who I didn't actually care about. I just wanted them to buy my beer. Then, when the weekend hit, I was depleted and had nothing left for my actual friends and family. I just ran away to the woods or mountains to recover. I know it's not the most damaging job for your mental health, but I wanted to share it because it surprised me how bad it was with the benefit of hindsight. Story 38. I'm a counselor who deals with the first responders and traumatic loss, cops, active duty military in war zones, social workers, counselors, hospice, ER/ICU nurses and staff, physicians, and paramedics, as all have been previously noted in this thread. Now, one thing I've noticed is that firefighters seem more resilient than most despite seeing horrific things like everyone else. I attribute this to two things. They often report having debriefing and group discussions following especially challenging or traumatic incidents, and they also have firehouse camaraderie, which is more like a family than any other group of first responders. When something goes badly, the thin blue line is too often involved in harming the people they serve, and thus they don't talk as much as firefighters because they are connected about internal affairs and investigations. I think this is part of why they became so tied and twisted. Firefighters, by comparison, rarely hurt people they serve and have less of a culture of obscuring the facts. This doesn't mean they talk enough about the horrors they see. There's still too much suck it up, bro culture, but they do better than most. Social workers and counselors, on the other hand, have fewer collective debriefing opportunities because the difficult situations they face often neglect individuals or very small teams involved in wraparound work. Privacy and confidentiality mean that what most of us in the field hear and deal with is not widely known. We're all in our respective individual circles of hell and can really only deconstruct it in supervision or consultation groups. Lastly, it's a chicken and egg situation when it comes to politicians. Some are drawn to that role because they are already narcissists and pathological liars, a mental health issue of their own, while other well-meaning people lose all sense of moral compass in the recruiting bid for re-election. This is why the U.S. House of Representatives is often filled with such irrational clowns, while the Senate seems a bit more sane. Re-election seems to be the primary role in the House of Representatives, truly the Hunger Games of the political world, so if you happen to be sane when you walk in the door the first time, you are sure to become mentally ill in some way if you stick around and repeatedly seek re-election. Story 39. Having worked in TV news, it's bad. I'm sure your first thought is that it's not that bad, but we are visually exposed to the worst of humanity. Think of natural disasters and so on. On top of that, you definitely spend more than 40 hours a week working for terrible pay. My first news job paid $9 an hour, which was lower than what grocery stores and fast food chains paid. You don't get to see your family on holidays. Depending on your position, you're working weekends and overnights. You have zero say over what your day will look like. You're essentially at management's beck and call. Oh, and the public gets to judge how good or bad of a job you do every day. On top of that, there are zero boundaries. People in newsrooms cuss each other out, scream at each other, and throw phones and chairs at each other. Not an exaggeration, and it's totally normal. I realized I really had to leave the news after I was sent to El Paso to cover the incident at Walmart. I'm not going to complain about the fact that I was on vacation and was told to drop everything to take a direct flight to El Paso. That's nothing compared to what the victims, their families, and the city experienced. But once I was there, I had to ask people about the worst day of their lives. I sobbed while walking with people at a rally. I sobbed myself to sleep while I was there. I cried every day for 2 weeks straight, even at my desk at work. Nobody batted an eye. No mental health resources were offered. Another terrible day marked in my memory. I had a Facebook message the family of a teenager who was terminated to see if they would give us an interview. This was the day after it happened. I knew it was a crappy thing to do and I felt terrible about it. I haven't deleted that message from my inbox. It serves as a reminder of the bad things I've done. Story 40. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner and therapist. I've done this for decades in the public sector. A great majority of my patients were younger. The majority of women I've seen in my practice were Mormon. Please never call me a church therapist. I happen to be competent at what I do. I'm an exception to the rule of burnout. How have I not burned out with my jobs and the unbelievably horrid pain and devastating true stories I've heard from the children and sometimes women I have treated and worked with? I love children and adults with all of my heart, and I work with them to help alleviate their suffering and to give them some measure of peace and safety. In other words, I'm not just listening to their pain and horror, I'm doing something to help them. I've cried in my office a time or two when I've heard stories of particularly horrible treatment of children and Mormon women. The church should be taken down to the ground one brick at a time, and your leaders are horrible. Story 41. While I'm sure that the emotionally demanding jobs mentioned in many of the top comments, like being a nurse in a nursing home, have a more direct, tangible impact on mental health, I can say from my own 10 plus years of experience in academia, humanities, that the environment messes up a lot of people. In my field and in my environment, it seems to be a combination of economic uncertainty and the inability to plan long term, which stems from working on short term contracts for years, and in some cases, decades, before ever getting a tenured position, a goal many never attain. The pressure to constantly justify your existence by proving over and over to colleagues and students that you're original, creative, and smart enough to be where you are. Especially in the humanities, frequent existential crises over whether what we do has anything to do with the practicalities of quote unquote real life. In any case, I have known a lot of fellow academics who went on long term sick leave or quit because of depression and burnout, and several who ended it all. Now, there is probably some correlation where people with personalities prone to these mental health issues might be more likely to be drawn to academia or certain disciplines in general. However, I have gotten to know a good number of people very closely who seemed naturally happy, healthy, and balanced when I first met them, and who left as wrecks after a few years of doing the academic grind. Story 42. I know people who've never done it will disagree, but I've been in retail for almost 20 years, management for 12, and it can really drain your soul. And not just the customers, but the employees. Customers have zero common sense and refuse to believe anything we say because we're, quote, minimum wage employees. I make over 100K, but go on. We don't know crap. But I've had an employee pass away. On the clock, employees have tried to end it all, had to terminate employees who used all of the FMLA for a serious medical condition or accident. Employees have been arrested and had to terminate them for job abandonment. It's exhausting to deal with everyone's problems while dealing with whatever you yourself have going outside of work. And if any of these stories got to you too, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.